What is going on, Tenna Crew? My name is Billy the Squid, and I truly believe that the Elden Ring map and world design is both the best and worst aspect about this game. Let me explain. Elden Ring is a phenomenal game, and I don't think a lot of people would argue against the fact that the open world that FromSoftware has made really lends its hand to how good and how large that game feels. From Software's first foray into the open world genre, I think they really hit it out of the park and showed what modern open world games can really be about. From Liurnia, Volcano Manor, the Underground, Altus Plateau, the Mountaintop of Giants, it is nothing but bangers when it comes to how these individual segments of the map are built and how fun they are to explore. And From Software did a great job, in my opinion, filling those open world spaces with sub dungeons, main dungeons, and things that just engage you and make you want to push into them. Now, some might say that the repetition in dungeons, bosses, so on and so forth kind of muddle the experience, but I do believe that it lends a positive light to certain experiences. And that's what I wanted to really get into with this video, because talking about the Elden Ring map and the Elden Ring open world and how good and bad it can actually be for the game's health is the story of two different playthroughs, an initial playthrough and then subsequent playthroughs. Because for me personally, I believe From Software went full send into making that initial first playthrough experience the most epic and fun open world experience that they could possibly make. And I do believe that came at the expense of subsequent playthroughs and the replayability of the game in general. And nothing sets that difference apart quicker than the map, the HUD, and the UI in general that affects the user experience of the game in general. When Elden Ring first came out, a lot of people were quick to undercut what Elden Ring was doing because it did not have what many considered modern UI, a modern map, and the user experience to a lot of people was claimed to be a negative one. I've covered this in more detail in the past, but the quick and dirty spark notes of that is, in my opinion, having a map and a world that actively makes you want to engage with it and not a UI component is always going to be better for somebody's initial playthrough experience. Having them actually want to see a mile marker off in the distance, go to that, and most likely find something worthwhile there is a wonderful thing. And I feel like it goes a lot more for engagement than just seeing a dot on a map or a dot on a compass and then going to that. Not only that, but the map itself gives enough clues on places that you might want to go in general that even if you don't see somewhere directly, you can look at the map and see like structures built onto the map and be like, hey, that's probably a ruin. Hey, this little hole here that's kind of carved into the side of a mountain, that's most likely a mine or a cave. And it gives you, based on the map itself, no UI component at all, a reason to want to go and check it. And all you have to do is click on it and a blue beam from the sky will lead you there. Instead of having to follow a compass waypoint, you can make your own waypoints. And I think this is the best way to do an open world experience, especially on an initial playthrough. And in my opinion, they almost got it right for like second playthroughs, new game pluses, and stuff like that. Whenever you go into a new game plus, the map is still wide open to you. It just wipes away all of the dungeon markers that have populated the map in that initial playthrough. What I think they should have done was make it so that all of those markers stay popped up. You just can't fast travel to them. That way you can pinpoint exactly where you want to go a little bit easier, just a small quality of life. You've already explored through this world once and found most of where the locations are. Why not go ahead and give that info as well? And then that way, if somebody happens to discover something new that they didn't notice on the first playthrough, it can still lend to that experience without them stumbling upon something, thinking that it's new, and then it's actually something that they've already done. And this leads me beautifully into my next point with the sheer volume of content that Elden Ring actually has. The Lands Between is a big place, and you are going to be hard pressed to actually explore all of it in a singular playthrough. I don't know how many players I talked to that thought they had explored a decent chunk of the Lands Between, but as soon as they push into that next area, the map just expands out even more. And this is exacerbated by the fact that there's a whole separate map underground below the Lands Between that a lot of people just don't know about or aren't going to engage with, because there's nothing story-wise other than the Radon and Ronnie questline that takes you to any sections of this river. So once again, you need that keen, engaged mindset for people to actively want to go and find these things. Because if you don't, these areas that you put so much hard work and effort into are going to be ignored. And this is where I feel those initial playthroughs really shine and subsequent playthroughs fall off a little bit. That first playthrough, you don't know what your build is going to be. You know the game gives you ample opportunity to respec if you've gotten to that point in the game, but you are just kind of experimenting as you go. At least that's the way I played the game whenever I first came through. And I have a feeling a lot of people felt that same way. There's so much that the game has to offer. You didn't want to miss out on something that you could potentially really fall in love with and enjoy. And one of the best things that FromSoftware did with Elden Ring is give a sense of natural familiarity while you are exploring. And this can be seen as both a pro and a con depending on who you ask, but I personally love the more organic way of teaching a player how to traverse each of these different sections of the game. Take, for instance, the various sub-dungeons of Elden Ring. You have caves, you have tunnels, you have catacombs, you have ruins, so on and so forth. What effectively becomes the Chalice dungeon system from Bloodborne, except every single piece is handcrafted and put together with love and care, gives that familiarity that those Chalice dungeons had, but injects them into an open world setting. Elden Ring early game really does a great job at teaching players what to expect of all the sub-dungeons, and also teaching what the sub-dungeons expect of the players. Caves are going to be where you find your crafting materials, tunnels are where you're going to find your upgrade materials for weapons, but then you have other sub-dungeons like the ruins, where there's always going to be a staircase that leads down to a treasure room, or the catacombs that always have a lever that you need to activate to be able to get to the final boss. Teaching these mechanics early allows for the game to naturally expand on these principles, layering that sense of familiarity with brand new engaging mechanics. And I think they do a really good job of it. Except for any of the heroes' graves that have the chariots, because those things are BS and I refuse to go in them unless it's something that I absolutely need for a build. And in build building, this is where the level and map design tends to fall short. And this just comes down to the way that FromSoftware builds their RPGs. They are just built different. They heavily rely on a static loot pool for most, if not all, of their major drops in the game. And Elden Ring expanded that loot pool out massively with cookbooks, with different flask components, with spirit summons. The loot pool's bigger than it's ever been. But FromSoftware needs that static loot pool to maintain its identity from other RPGs around. If FromSoftware were to pull from other open world games, such as Bethesda-style open world games, it would be based off of a lot of procedurally generated and randomized loot, with some static loot still being in the game through quest lines and stuff like that. But the majority of your day-to-day gear that you're going to get would have been coming from randomized sources. And there's still a little bit of a flavor of that randomization in Souls games, Dark Souls 3 and the previous, and Elden Ring as well, with enemy drops and stuff like that. It's not always a guaranteed chance that an enemy is going to drop an item, but it is guaranteed that only that enemy will drop that item. That is the difference. And in previous FromSoftware titles, the static loot pool has never been an issue because the games have been significantly more compacted. So you are most likely going to be walking through 80 to 90% of a game, regardless of if it's your first playthrough or if it's your 100th playthrough. But when it comes down to Elden Ring, having that static loot pool and the world being as wide as it is, subsequent playthroughs are going to suffer, especially when you have a build specifically in mind, because you're not going to be going to each and every different area. Hell, with the case of Elden Ring, I would say you would probably only go to like 35 to 40% of the game, if that, depending on whatever build you are going to do. Just because you know that is a static loot pool, and exactly what you need is going to be in the same place every single time. And this kind of drives home the point that depending on how you approach this game, you're going to get different experiences based on what you are wanting. If you go into it as an open world exploration based game, you are going to find that exploration is very rewarding and engaging, with the caveat that you could potentially burn yourself out on the repetition of dungeons, bosses, and the like. But if that is something that doesn't bother you, then you are going to have a wonderful experience. On the other side of the coin, if you go into it with a very strict mindset of what you are wanting to accomplish in the game. Maybe you're using third-party resources to kind of map out where you want to go and how you want to get there. You could very well have just as good of an experience as somebody that is wandering through the game au natural. And your 20-hour playthrough could be just as engaging, fun, and rewarding as somebody's 50 to 75-hour playthrough, all depending on how you want to digest this game. But it could also be just as frustrating, considering that a lot of that time spent is going to be riding around on torrent, going from point A to point B, basically Dark Souls with a buffer period in the middle of it. And you're either going to like that or you're going to find it boring and move on to something else. At the end of the day, not every game is going to appeal to every type of gamer, and I feel like FromSoftware did their best to branch out and bring as many people into their style of RPGs as they possibly could, and I genuinely think that they succeeded. I feel like this game is built entirely around that initial playthrough experience, whether you are going from point A to point B as you organically find them, or whether you map it out. I don't think there is a wrong way to play through these games, but your mileage may vary in subsequent playthroughs just based off how the world design and map design is built. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you think Elden Ring's replayability is there, or do you think this is a one and done title? Are you excited for potential DLCs to come up? As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We will be doing more content like this in the future. But until next time, Tentacrew, much love. Bye-bye.